Agenda West Side Beer.
Guys, welcome to the episode of Into the West Comics. My name is Frank. I'm going to give him a second. Uncle Nephew Shane is here.
Late, also.
I was not late.
Yes, you were.
I was a little late.
Yeah.
I just sat down like 15 seconds ago. I sat down.
I was going to say like 25, but yeah, it's about that.
Okay.
Hot Dog Corn Dog Paul is here.
What to do, baby? Frank and I were on time. I'm just giving shit crap.
The show has begun, and I'm sitting in a chair. That means I'm on time, Paul.
Yeah. If you're not early, you're late, right?
It's always that technicality. And we have a very behave yourselves. We have a very special guest. You know him from his work on Buckhead as well as New Masters. He is venturing into game creation with the Lamplighters League. I've been wanting to get this guy on for a while to talk to him. Please welcome Shobo Coker.
Woo.
Hey.
Hey folks, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Good morning.
Absolutely.
Good morning.
Good for
Good
him,
morning.
Yeah.
Good morning. Yes.
Yes,
9 a.m.
it's breakfast where you're at over there.
Finally,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just to say good morning.
Still
Right
taco time in not America, but that's taco time in the Philippines.
That's right.
Oh,
9 a.m. I don't know. It's pretty early.
Yeah. You know.
I guess you could have breakfast tacos. You know.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
there you
Ooh.
go.
Hey.
See,
that sounds delicious.
it's taco time somewhere. That's what they say, right? I don't know. Anyways,
Yeah, so we're excited for you being on and taking some time to be with us. We're gonna go around and talk about a lot of different projects. We really just wanted to kind of just hang with you, talk about all the stuff that you had been working on in the past, kind of like your start, where you got your start as far as the industry, and what's led you to where you're at right now, Paul.
yeah. So we wanted to start off. I was reading some other interviews you did because I wanted to try not to be too redundant with you. But in one of them, you talked a lot about how it was hard to get comics when you were growing up, and they were scarce, especially Marvel and DC, and that Conan and Tintin and things like that had a huge impact on you because that's what you could get. And it wasn't even usually full arcs. You were getting issue by issue kind of. So I guess I wanted to ask you, how did the comic books like Conan and Tintin inform books like Buckhead and what you're doing with Lamplighters League and everything going forward?
Yeah. So thank you. Also, thank you for the research. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, growing up in Lagos, Nigeria was in the 80s. It was wonderful. I had a great childhood. But because of the state of the country, it was difficult to get new issues of comic books, and so we would often get pieces of arcs. We'd typically get black and white copies of Marvel and DC comics. They were printed on the cheapest newsprint you could find, but there were still amazing stories. My dad is an artist, and he's always loved storytelling. and he used to get me copies. He was a huge fan of John Buscema, and so he'd collect copies of John Buscema's Conan stories wherever he could find them, and at some point they made their way into my hands. I might have been a little bit too young to be reading Conan, but
Maybe a little bit.
you know, that's where it started.
It's the 80s, so like
Yeah, it
was
was
a perfect
it
time
was
to
the
read.
80s, right? Yeah, it was the 80s. Yeah, you know, and my mom was the one who managed to get her hands on the Tintin books, and I was just kind of fascinated with the idea of this reporter who would travel to different cultures all over the world, and visit them. And you know, Hergé, who created Tintin, gets well, he got a lot wrong. Let's put it that way. But the idea again of this reporter who would go to different countries and kind of try to pay attention to them and try to learn from those cultures, uh, it left its mark on me. I won't say that Conan and Tintin directly led to Buckhead. I think there's probably a clearer line there to stuff like Outcasts of Jupiter and New Masters.
Okay.
But if you read Buckhead, it's clearly, I think, influenced by media from the 80s. There's the obvious parallels to things like Stranger Things and you know, maybe things like Paper Girls, but Buckhead was pretty much born of that idea of kids in a neighborhood in the 80s, and something strange and amazing happening. And I've always loved robots, and I've loved androids. And I was like, hey, what if I took robots and androids, and I took African futurism, and I took that small town 80s mystery, and I sort of threw them together in this weird Jordan Peele-esque meets Steven Spielberg
so, yeah.
mashup.
Very
you
much
know?
so.
And it was a ton of fun. It was a project that was in the works at Boom for quite a while, actually. I moved back to the US in 2017, and I'd been talking with Boom for a few years before actually getting Buckhead off the ground. And right when we were gaining some traction, the pandemic hit, and comic projects were getting canceled left and right. And Buckhead was going to be my first comic, and I thought, yep, that's definitely going to get the axe. But thank goodness, you know, the people at Boom were really passionate about it, and I had great editors, and they just sort of made sure that the whole thing gained enough momentum that it carried through all the way through. Publishing a comic in the pandemic was wild, you know.
I'm sure.
It's wild. Yeah.
So on top of Buckhead, you have things like Lamplighters, and that's supposed to be, it's going to be a video game, as I understand, or
Yeah, it's out.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Do you want to talk a little bit about Lamplighters and how that kind of came together?
Oh, man, Lamplighters. Okay, so making a video game was on my bucket list as a writer. I love video games. I love writing generally, and so I'm like, I want to do it all. I want to write comics, I want to write TV, I want to write video games, I want to make video games, and so I got the opportunity to join Harebrained Schemes in 2020. Again, March of 2020 specifically, right as the pandemic was hitting, and I moved across the country from Atlanta all the way to Seattle for this job, and this was March of 2020, right as things were heating up. I don't know if you remember what that period in time was like exactly, but this was right when, just after kind of the first major outbreaks in the U.S. were happening.
Kind of like March-ish.
Yeah, March, exactly March. I remember it very well. So you know, I moved across the country into this apartment complex, pretty much all by myself, and had this bizarre experience of moving into a place without seeing or hearing from anyone at all. I got there and knocked on the admin office door, and pretty much like a key card was slid under the door to me. I was like, well, I guess I live here now. But
Nice.
But working on Lamplighters was a dream come true. HBS is the first and only place that I've ever worked at where I was excited to get up and work every day.
That's
It's
awesome.
an amazing studio. wonderfully talented people. The game came out a couple of weeks ago. It it's a turn-based tactics game set in the 1930s, and it's about this. It's sort of like XCOM meets Indiana Jones. So
XCOM is dope.
you've got Eldritch occult horror, and you've got sort of Nazi fighting pulp adventure scoundrels trying to save the world. It was a ton of fun to work on. The reception, I think, has been, there's been a lot of news. There's been a lot of news about HBS and about Lamplighters over the past week, specifically because our publisher has parted ways, or HBS's publisher parted ways with the company shortly after the release of the game. And there's been news about mass layoffs occurring at HBS a few months before the game's release, which definitely did not help. I was actually one of the people affected in July. It did not come entirely as a shock, honestly, and there are agreements in place, basically saying that there's only so much that I can talk about. But I will say that I think that the team at HBS absolutely poured their heart and soul into that game. And I think if you play it, you can kind of see the depth of love that went into that creative project. Making games is, if you like playing games, then you probably have an idea of how complex they are. I can say without question that making a game is way, 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 way more complex than you could probably imagine. They're marvels. The fact that any single game comes out is kind of a little miracle, honestly.
Right. And that was going to be my last question to you before we throw to the other guys is, what were some of those differences, as you were kind of touching on, between getting Buckhead off the ground and how that came together, and the difference between putting a video game together and a comic book together, and how much control you may have in one or the other, and what the kind of duality of that is? And it seems like it was happening at similar times, so you're wearing a couple hats at the same time.
Yeah, I was. And again, it was maybe a strange blessing curse thing that I was in this 500 square foot apartment, a studio apartment in Redmond, and pretty much it was just me, like I said, working fairly steadily on both Buckhead and Lamplighters League at the same time. Writing at its most base level, writing is writing. If you understand the fundamentals and you're passionate, you're off to a good start. But then very quickly I discovered that things diverge. Writing for comics is typically, you do tend to have a lot more control. It's basically you and the editor and the publisher. And so there are fewer stakeholders. There's also a lot less money on the line. As a creative person, you do have to understand and be aware that you are still working with you're still working with people's jobs. You've got people's jobs, not necessarily on the line, but you're working with an editor, you're working with artists, and they've all got jobs, and they're trying to create this thing with you.
Right.
It's a much smaller pool than working on a video game where you have an entire studio. HBS was I would say a mid-sized studio. We were maybe between 60 and 70 people. So mid-sized to small, but still, when you consider the publisher and the number of people who have input on this creative project, and the fact that I was one of a larger writing team. I was a narrative designer, and I had a co-narrative designer, and there was a lead narrative designer, and a third senior designer. So there was a group of about four core writers on the game, and then we had assistants from the creative director, Chris Rogers, and from the studio head, Mitch Gittleman, as well. So that's a lot more people. When it comes to the actual technicalities of the writing, when you're writing for games, and especially mid to AAA size games, you are kind of you're writing very much with the mind of the player in your head, because people play games in such strange and different ways. When you're reading a comic book, you pick it up, you read a page, you stop and pause. Maybe you go get a coffee, you put it down for a couple of days, you can come back to it, and you can still sort of easily track where you left off. With a video game, people's attention is divided by much more than just the words and the art. They're thinking about music, they're thinking about mechanics, they might be in a very tense frame of mind, and so you often have to do things like reinforce objectives. So the player's objective might be to destroy a weapons cache, and so you'll have to put that on the screen in like a UI box up there that says destroy the weapons cache.
Right.
And then when the characters load into the level, they'll have to say, well, we're here to destroy the weapons cache. And then you have to have an objective marker that leads you there to the objectives cache. And when they press pause, something comes up to say, this is your objective. And all of that might feel, it's when I remember when I started, I kept thinking it feels like we're writing for the lowest common denominator. And I don't particularly like that. But then you watch playtests, or you watch other people play, and you see how people play games. And the truth is that people are usually only paying attention to one or maximum two of those data input streams. And so those reinforcements become necessary. And you're kind of trying to think about how you can keep them interesting and how you can keep them engaging. You're also trying to think about ways to play with or subvert players' expectations constantly. You're thinking about ways of building the world and the universe in lots of different ways, whether that is through agent barks. We have agents who go on these missions, and they'll bark, which means they will say something when they perform an action. If they shoot, a wannabe cowboy, ex-bank robber Eddie might say something like "get," and he's that's sort of his background, and that's him expressing his character, and that reinforces sort of where he's from. And then you build on that with things like letters and journals and lore, and you work with level designers and artists. So it's a hugely collaborative process. You're a much smaller part of this huge moving creative machine.
Did you feel any kind of pressure from just having that many people involved in it and doing this game? Was it, did you feel like, did it seem overwhelming at times, or at times, or were you always just, there's no problem in doing this?
That's a good question. I definitely felt pressure, but I think for a few different reasons. The truth is, because this was my first game dev job, I had a wonderful lead who kind of took on a lot of the pressure that usually comes, when I'm writing a comic, I do feel some of that pressure because I want the comic to be at least moderately successful enough that I'm asked to come back, successful enough that I don't lose a ton of money for the publisher.
Because the comic's got your name on it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But when I was working on this video game, because you're working with a team, there are more people to absorb that pressure, and what I felt was mostly, at first, it was imposter syndrome.
Right.
That I think that's something that creatives are pretty familiar with. It's like, what am I doing here? They're going to find out I have no idea what I'm doing because I didn't.
Yeah.
And every morning.
That's how we feel here every now and then.
Yeah.
I think.
Listen, it's. I can't say that it's a great way to live, but it definitely lights a fire under you.
Yeah, that's true.
Definitely.
So the first few months, I definitely felt that. But again, HBS was and is such a welcoming place. They are very much a people first studio, and people like my lead, like my coworkers, they provide so much emotional support and so much not vocational, but support when it comes to allowing you to learn the process of writing for games, that after about 6 months, I started to feel much better about myself and much more confident in what I was doing. And so the pressure is definitely there. because at the end of the day, you're doing a job and you don't want to lose that job. But I felt like I was in good hands, and I felt like I had a team that would provide feedback and support when I needed it.
Which is
and,
great.
And that's something
Yeah.
that's a little bit different when you're working on a comic. There is still, depending on which publisher you're working with, there's still a team in place to help you. A publisher like Boom, you work pretty closely with an editor, and so you do get that sort of storytelling support that I think every good editor provides, where they say, actually, maybe like these themes are not these themes that you want to tease out. They're not quite emerging in the way that you want them to, because when you're writing, you're in your own head. You know the plot. You know all of the plot twists, and sometimes it can be difficult to know how hard to telegraph or how hard to go on a certain story beat. And a good editor will give you feedback about pacing and about things like plot twists and plot elements and about how well they're working.
Right.
They'll help cover your blind spots when it comes to myriad of different issues. So yeah, there's pressure, but I was not the game director, and I was not the one responsible for a multi-million-dollar game. So I felt like I was in good hands.
Ooh, you're like, okay, I feel better about this. Old.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. You
I love you.
I'm gonna get all 60 minutes on you now. I have a question.
Go for it.
You mentioned Outcast of Jupiter earlier, and did you work with your brother on Outcast of Jupiter?
I did, yes.
And since then, you worked on, you have the influence of sci-fi as well as alien colonizers with everything you're doing now. Did you go back and forth a lot with your brother? Did you guys have arguments? How easy was it to work with your brother on those things? His name is Shof? Shof is it?
His name's Shof. Yeah, his name's Shof.
Yeah.
He is an extremely talented artist. He actually just put out his first animated short film
Oh, very
Nice.
cool.
on Disney Plus. It's part of there's an African futurist sort of short similar to the Star Wars Visions and the What If. Disney Plus kind of got together a bunch of rising African talents to create short animated films. It's called Kizazimoto. It's Kizazi space OTO. So you should check it out. His name's Shof.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Working with Shof is it's honestly it's great because again, I think every writer wishes that they had strong relationships with a great artist, and I was lucky that my brother is able to do that. And so he understands the shorthand that we grew up together. So he knows we have a lot of those same kind of inputs and experiences, those foundational experiences. We have them. He knows what it was like to be a kid in 80s and 90s Nigeria. He knows the things that we yearn for, the problems we face, the challenges. He knows the frustrations we had with the government, with the fear of military dictatorships. He knows the hopes and the dreams that we had for Nigeria and Nigerian future, the frustration we felt as youth growing up in that environment. He knows all of that. Like it's built into him, and so I don't have to try and explain it to him.
Right.
When I'm working on pitches, one of the things that is often the hardest for me is getting that across, because when you're speaking with an editor, editors generally like their comic book pitches to be 1 to 2 pages, and I'm like, well, look, there's a lot more background going into this. There are a lot more reasons why the story is the way that it is, why the characters are the way that they are, and so like convincing people can be difficult, and I never have to convince Shof that way.
Right.
We do have debates, creative debates, and like those are great because I know that whatever final decision we come to, because I trust him so much, even if it's not even if it's not my decision and it's not the idea that I had originally, I know that the idea that he's proposed has merit. So that's one of the great things about working with him. It can get difficult and challenging at times, because we're both creative people.
Yeah.
We're brothers, so we will argue. Sometimes we'll argue for the sake of arguing, like, just because I want to be on the other side of the argument. Like, it happens.
Yeah, Shane and I do that all the time, and
all
we're not
the
even
time.
related.
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah.
you can tell or not, but
We're like,
You're not,
we're like
no.
I feel like we're brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, since 2014, you've collaborated with Shof, right?
I would say even before that, 2014, that was when Outcast first came out.
Right.
But we had been working on that universe for since at least 2007, 2008. I think that's when the first kind of collaborative sketches for that universe came out. Back then, I was focusing on a few different characters in that universe, and trying to figure out what the species were and the lore. And Shof would do character sketches, and then it was like, he went off to college and focused on college, and I went to the Philippines and started my marketing career. I put that in air quotes because
I love air quotes.
and then at some point, we like got back together for new masters. So yeah, it's been great. I give him a lot of grief, but like I'm so grateful for that.
Listen, I could turn this very dark. I could go, why do you hate your brother?
I mean, I could go into that.
So there's the can of worms that's been opened.
Yeah.
We got it.
No, I get it. I get it. Me and Frank fight like cats and dogs all the time as well. And I can honestly say I do dislike Frank greatly. But we got to do this show.
This is breaking news right here.
Yeah, we got to do this. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
All right, I love you too, buddy. So, Shobo, with regards to Buckhead, I mean, we're talking about you were working on this project. You're pitching it to Boom. They sign off on it. You're working on this project. You're isolated. It's going on in the pandemic. How did you connect with George Kambitis? Is that his name? He's the Greek artist?
Yeah, George Kambitis. Yeah. So again, that was one of the awesome things about working with Boom, is that when you're working with a lot of publishers, you're like, you must come in with a creative team. And I understand why, and that makes sense. It gets a project rolling a lot faster. It's easier for the publisher. But Boom is very much, I think the way they work is that they want to take a lot of the weight off the creator. And so you kind of come to them and you're like, hey, this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm thinking of. And they will kind of, the editor will say, hey, here are a bunch of artists who do some amazing things. What art style are you thinking of, and who are you thinking of? If you have people in mind already, then that's great. But typically they will reach out, and in this case they reached out to George. We had a meeting, we hit it off. We talked about a bunch of geek stuff. We talked about Buckhead a little bit, about the ideas that I had, and then we just sort of started developing the world together over a few weeks, kind of going back and forth on sketches and styles and designs. And it was. I was pretty isolated. I think I actually started working with George just before I moved to Redmond. So it wasn't, the actual production of Buckhead happened in Redmond, but pre-production was in Atlanta, where I kind of consider home base when I'm in the U.S.
Okay. So how much of the story building came from actual experiences of you first experiencing like American culture for the first time? I mean, I know that throughout like Buckhead, like a ton of variants. I know because I bought them, like all of them. But there's a bunch of variant covers that have a lot of homages to different video games. Actually, Shof did a variant cover, I think.
He did
for
yes,
it.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of those homages to those video games. It was that sort of like a bridge to being immersed in the American culture for you.
So the video game homages were actually more directly, most of them were directly related to kind of growing up again in the 80s and 90s, because a lot of them were things like Super Mario Brothers. Some of them were a bit more modern and a bit more kind of pointed towards my transitional experience of moving here to the US, like Minecraft, which or moving to the US, which Minecraft came out roughly around the time when I was in college, and was at the time. It's hard to think back now that I think Minecraft has sold something like 150 million copies or something.
Biggest
But
game
back then
ever
it was
game,
this,
yeah.
it was this weird small Java game that like people were like, hey, you're playing Minecraft, and so we did a variant cover for that. Those were so much fun because we did a Final Fantasy VII homage as
Yep.
well, which was a game that I played in Nigeria. It was one of those games. I think back then, and it's similar to here. When you got a game, games didn't come out every single week or multiple games a day. So you'd get a game and you would play it. That was like the game that you were going to play for hours and hours and hours.
Right.
And Final Fantasy VII was one of those for me. So that's the actual covers came from. As far as the how storytelling experiences relate to my experience coming to the U.S., there's a lot of that stuff in Buckhead. Things like name pronunciation, like just coming into this new strange environment, and being an outsider, and meeting up with a core group of friends, because that's one of the things that I had in college that I wasn't expecting. Was I think everyone, or most people, when they go to college, that you kind of find the friends of your life, people who
Yeah.
you even if you don't stay in touch with them for decades afterwards, they are kind of in your heart. And so I wanted to have this relationship between some of these characters where it was just sort of this kind of unconditional love, almost, where they have your back and that they have your back no matter what. And so when Toba moves to the sleepy little town of Buckhead, he just makes a few instant friends, and those friends are the people that give him the emotional support that he needs when you've gone halfway across the world, and you don't have a family, you don't know the culture. There were so many little things that I was trying to evoke. Things like walking up to a vending machine and not knowing how it worked, not knowing how the denominations of the money. Because one of the I think weird things about U.S. money is that it's all the same color. It's all that kind of green color.
No, we don't even think about that. That's crazy.
Right.
I mean, because where I was from, money is different colors, and so you don't have to look at a note to know what denomination it is. You know that, I'm holding a red note, it's a 20 naira note. I'm holding a purple note, it's 100, it's 100 or something like that. So just like little things that make you micro pause in societal transactions, like somebody asks for a 5 or a 10, and you pause for a second because you have to look at the bill, and in your mind you're thinking, this gives me away as an outsider. Those are little things. So I was very much trying to put that sense of isolation into Buckhead, and I think while working on it during the pandemic, writing the book actually got darker, because in the first draft of the comic, Toba was going to go into the video game universe. He's going to go into the Elseverse, and he was going to be able to save his dad. And while I was writing Buckhead, my father-in-law passed away in the Philippines, and I was in the States, and there was nothing that I could do, really. My wife was in the Philippines, and all I could do was offer emotional support, and I couldn't go visit. And writing a story like Buckhead with a happy ending, with what would have been, I think, a saccharine ending, didn't feel real emotionally at the time. And so I made the decision that Tobaz wouldn't be able to save his dad, but his dad's memory was going to be there, and it was going to live on, and it was going to be passed on to Toba. So those are the kinds of things that went into writing Buckhead, and the emotional space that I was in. because of the pandemic, because of the things that happened during the pandemic. So it is a kid's book, but I think and I hope there is a little bit of an edge to it.
Absolutely.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love the storytelling of it. I mean, I'd be interested if you ever decided to go back to it and expand a little bit. I mean, these kids got to grow up, right? I mean, they're going to experience life a little bit more. If there's is there a possibility that we could get more of these characters down the line?
I hope so. I honestly, it's a universe that there's a lot more that's on the page because I created an entire lore document. So there's a huge backstory behind how and why things happen in the town, the history of the town, and there's also a lot about what happens afterwards. So it is a universe that I'd like to visit. For quite a while now, I've kind of been toying with the idea of writing a Buckhead novelization that expands a bit on those ideas.
Okay.
And I would say never. There are other projects that I'd like to explore first, but maybe at some point we go back. Maybe we do visit Buckhead again. I'd love to, because that intersection of African futurism and video games is one that I'm very excited about exploring. Maybe it might not even be a comic. Like I think it would be really cool to do a Buckhead video game.
Yeah.
One concept that I had, and I was like, I would love to pitch this to someone. Is I would love to have a Netflix animated show where that's again homaging stuff like the 80s, and it's the kids in the hideout, and then they go into the Elseverse, and so you're watching this show and you're able to transition seamlessly to maybe like a mobile game or a video game version,
Right.
and play it with your friends. Essentially, dive into this dungeon and fight enemies and recover artifacts and things and save them, and then bring them back to your hideout. And the next episode is the next episode reflects some of the choices that you made while you were there in the Elseverse.
Almost
because
like a more interactive version of like Bandersnatch and like Black Mirror. That sounds like super
yes,
cool.
exactly. Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we could hopefully start doing now more. That like real-time rendering video game graphics is getting so advanced that if you wanted to incorporate the choices that a viewer makes into your next episode, you can do that without the huge cost of rendering that you would typically have on an animated show. So it's something. All that is to say that there's nothing currently planned for follow-ups to Buckhead, but like I've got ideas, and at some point I'm going to put them down, and I'll probably go back to Boom and say, hey, what do you think about this?
Right.
So we'll see.
So there's been a lot of video game talk, and it's been making me think, what video games, I know you're probably pretty busy and got a lot of work going on, but what video games recently, or maybe not like in the past week or two, but over the past year or two, have you been playing, and what are some of the newer games that you've been into? Because I know personally, when I go home tonight, I'm buying the new Spider-Man game, and that's going to be what I pour my time into over the next couple weeks. So in that vein, I'm just curious to know like what kind of video games you've been playing over the past year, 3 years, couple months, whatever.
So first of all, let me just say I've been essentially unemployed since July. I got a lot of free time. so yeah, video games. I've been playing a ton of video games, and it's been great because while I was working at HBS, and this was the first game that I'd worked on, it was one of those experiences where when you see how the sausage is made, so to speak, and you kind of like step behind you step behind the curtain. Video games lose a little bit of their magic in one way, because you understand all of the triggers and the levers and the way that the developers are. And when I say manipulating, I don't mean manipulating you. I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just mean
just practically.
Storytelling. Yeah, like storytelling is about manipulation. It's about evoking emotion and feeling. And when you see how all of that's done, it changes the way you play games. If you were critical of them before, you become even more critical. And so the break has kind of been good for me. I've played a few big games. One of the games that I'm playing through at the moment is the Hogwarts Legacy game.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's kind of been interesting seeing how that team approached a massive, huge IP and created something in that space that feels appropriate to the universe, and that evokes that same feeling without saying, "Hey, you're Harry Potter." So I've been playing that a lot. I've been trying to broaden the kinds of games that I play. So I've played huge games like that. I've also played smaller adventure games like there's this game called Unavowed, which it's a 2D adventure game where you play a recently possessed person who kind of gets drawn into the New York occult underworld, and you're trying to investigate the demon that just possessed you.
Right.
And the great thing about games like those is that they can make interesting creative decisions that the bigger games can't make. So as much as I love that huge spectacle of the Harry Potter games and the Spider-Man game that's coming out today, I think a lot of the more interesting, risky, innovative stuff is only possible in those smaller games with small teams where you have someone who has a strange vision. Like, you know what? I want to make a game where you play as a loaf of bread, which actually 100% exists. I'm not making that
It's like
up.
my life.
It's a game called I Am Bread. You play as a loaf of bread.
It sounds delicious. I want to play that game.
Yeah.
You get stuff like
so
Goat Simulator,
Like
or
Cuphead
whatever.
or something? Like Cuphead?
Yeah.
Cuphead is cool.
Cuphead's great.
Cuphead is cool. That's another situation where, like, you know, because the amount of money that you spend, and Cuphead's an expensive game, but comparatively compared to something like Spider-Man, which, you know, I don't know what the budget is of Spider-Man, but I would hazard a guess it is easily north of 100 million, maybe even closer to 200. But something like Cuphead is far less expensive, and so they can look at their presentation and say, let's take a risk. Let's look back at 1930s era Fleischer. Well, I don't think it's Fleischer style cartoons exactly, but somewhere around that kind of art style, you know, and let's build a game around that. So yeah, now these days I definitely try to vary my inputs as to what kinds of games that I'm creating, especially now that I'm going to be creating games more often, because I want to understand the breadth of what video games can do. Because I think as much as I love video games, throughout the history, the most popular games have always been the ones that kind of put a gun in your hands and say go, and that's a ton of fun, but it's always pushing the same button pretty much. It's pushing that emotional button of like, how am I going to hurt? How am I going to immediately get that adrenaline rush? And now I want to see how other people are evoking other feelings, things like sadness, grief, and loss, or intrigue and suspense, fear, love. I'm playing a ton of different kinds of games. I am looking forward to that new Spider-Man game. It looks awesome.
I think kind of what you were talking about with your idea for Buckhead and it being almost like a Bandersnatch style like show, but into a video game. I think stuff like that is very cool, and it innovates into kind of medias. And to kind of bring it back to like the games, it's stuff like that you do it once and it blows up and it becomes kind of this style that everyone comes to imitate. The example like I think of in my head is I never really played the Dark Souls game, and I got really into Elden Ring because for a long time I was like, the narrative's not really there. It's like you kind of piece it together yourself. That doesn't, for me, because I love like the God of War games like Ragnarok and stuff, like I kind of like it getting spoon-fed a little bit to me. But then I played Elden Ring, and piecing it together, like piecing the lore together yourself, not having a character stand in front of you or seeing any cinematics, just kind of reading a letter that your character gets from somebody and then putting it together. That started with the King's something or other games that FromSoft did in the 90s. Kingsfield, there you go. and then all the way to Demon Souls when it finally blew up. And that kind of innovative, hey, we're not going to spoon feed you the story, wasn't, it seems so mainstream now, but it wasn't. It was because somebody had an idea and said, let's try this, and it worked out. So I think things like utilizing that for a possible show with Buckhead would be, I've literally never heard anybody ever have that idea, and I think just hearing you talk about it would be incredibly cool and could help push things forward in a way that maybe 20 years from now that seems like normal, but it wasn't.
Yeah, innovation is difficult. It's risky. Demon Souls, you're right. You're 100% right. That's when that sort of that Soulsborne genre took off. Was with Demon Souls, and the company that made those games. As you said, FromSoft, they'd been making games in that vein for a long time. They weren't particularly successful. They did well enough to stay afloat, but it was Demon Souls, the kind of, and the initial reception to Demon Souls was, it came out and people were like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
But then a small hardcore group was like, actually, this is amazing. And they talked about it and they spread the word. And sometimes you need like a confluence of things. You need a unique idea. You need great execution. You also need a little bit of, actually a lot of luck.
Luck, yeah.
Because one of the most difficult things about creating new media and new IP, which is something that I've always tried to do, is like I've tried to steer away from, not because I don't love Spider-Man and Black Panther and Batman and Superman. Like, I love all those things, but for the most part, I'm like, I have ideas. I want to create these things. I want to put them into the world, right? And one of the really hard things about new IP is just getting people to see them and notice them and talk about them.
All right.
Because that huge banner space when you log on is almost always reserved for a Marvel IP or DC IP or something that the publisher or the people with the money, something that they know that they can bank on, because they don't want to lose money. They've got shareholders, they have responsibilities. It's understandable, but at the same time, if you have new stories and the only things that people are reviewing are the last issue of Batman and the last issue of Green Lantern, and nobody reviews or talks about Buckhead or talks about New Masters or talks about Jalea from Juniba, or Monkey Meat from Juniba, the smaller independent new strange and original IPs, then readers aren't going to find them.
Right.
So my point is, something like Demon Souls, you're right, it's blown up now, but it was a long, hard, expensive, risky road to get there.
Yep.
Who do you like as far as writing is concerned? What writers are you following right now, and what are you reading right now?
Oh man, it's not a good question for me. That's not a good question for me, because it exposes the depth of my ignorance and also, frankly, how internal I am when it comes to like focusing on my own stuff.
That makes sense. So that does make sense.
Like just because when it comes to comics, I mentioned Juniba, whose work I really enjoy. Like, I just love how playful, and how easily and effortlessly he can go from playful, fun, and funny to like scary and frightening. And I pick up his books, and they're so full of joy and excitement, and I'm like, he's figured out how to take that visual reduction that goes on in African art and translate it to the visual medium of comics in a vibrant way, in a way that feels alive. So I really admire Juni's work. Aside from that, honestly, I tend to, like I said, concentrate very much on my own stuff.
Well, what's been motivating you? Like, what motivates you lately? Where you're just going, you got something in your head. Do you wake up in the middle of the night with something in your head? You think it's a great idea, or how does the ideas come to you?
They come that way quite a bit. it's weird you mention that because just last night I was seriously thinking, man, when the Neuralink arrives and we have no way, because right now, we got cell phones and we were like, oh, you can never disconnect, but you can turn your cell phone, you charge
Sure.
your cell phone, you turn off your computer. When they get the Neuralink, oh boy, writers are going to be in trouble because you have that idea in the middle of the night and you're like, I have no excuse not to like brain write it down somewhere.
Yeah.
And so the ideas come from that. Sometimes
kinda
they'll come
spooky.
from watching. I try to watch and read old media. I say old media, but I mean like media from the 1940s through the 70s and 80s in particular. I like obscure stuff. I like especially obscure stuff from the 80s and 90s, movies and shows that maybe are not necessarily good, but had a lot of passion and thought behind
Right.
them, like that were creatively interesting. Um, and sometimes it'll be just the nugget of an idea that I'm like, I like that idea. I'm going to steal it, and then I'm going to find a way to make it my own. Because I think, there's a lot of talk about creativity and inspiration, where that comes from. And I think a lot of successful creatives will tell you that they don't pay homage, they steal. Because what happens, I think, when you do that is you love it so much. You take that idea and then you don't just repaint it and repackage it, you rebuild it from the ground up. So you have the bones of this idea, and you look at it not from the point of view of the original creator, but from your point of view. And so I will see something and I'll say, African futurism. I want to build an African futurist universe with new masters. And I love science fiction, and I love how how people like Asimov built their science fiction universes, and I love how people like Tolkien built their fantasy universes. How can I build my African futurist universe? And so you do a bunch of research, and you find out that maybe like so many African cultures have ties to fractals and mathematics. And fractal mathematics was something that kind of really became big in the West in the 1970s, but African societies they'd been basing societies and basing architecture and design on them for hundreds of years before that. And they'd been like building their villages in these weird fractal repeating patterns that people didn't recognize and realize until an ethnomathematician named Ron Eglash sort of quote unquote discovered this in the late 80s and early 90s. And he was like, hey, there's fractal math going on here. Was it a mistake, or do you know what you're doing? Turns out you actually do know what you're doing, and you're doing this on purpose. And I'm like, okay, well, we can take that concept and I can build that into the African futurist universe that I'm creating. And so in New Masters, the alien species kind of locks all their knowledge behind this recursive fractal repeating algorithm. And so that's one of the things that the characters have to come to understand. And not breaking necessarily, but accessing the information within that algorithm is something that is going to be one of the core repeating stories in what I hope are succeeding issues of New Masters. So long story short, my ideas come from everywhere and anywhere at all times, and I have learned, keep a notepad with you, because when you get those ideas at 2 a.m. in the morning and you're like, I'll write it down in the morning, they're gone by the way.
They don't come back. They don't come back.
They don't.
They're gone.
That was, as a creative person, one of the biggest things that I had to learn was that if you have an idea, write it down. It might be stupid, but just write that idea down, and then later on you can see if you can expand on it. And I will say that in the past 3 to 4 years, I felt more creative than I have at any point in my entire life. I've got more ideas for pitches and universes and characters than ever, which is,
Fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing more about video game development as well as some more comics. This has been awesome. We appreciate you taking the time and getting up early. We know it's early time over there in the Philippines. And this has been really cool. We really, really do appreciate you hanging out with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure talking about all the things that I love.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to have you, and I'm sure we'll have you back on to talk more about things because there's a gold mine of information in that.
How do I get that shirt? Wait, what are
This shirt was actually a Kickstarter exclusive, unfortunately, for Outcast of Jupiter. So I don't think we have any yet.
Can you send me your actual shirt? That'd be awesome.
Don't
See what I
answer
can
that,
do.
Shobo.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you can pay for shipping from the Philippines, yeah.
We'll just fly Shane out and he'll grab it.
That'll be fine.
Let me borrow it at least. No.
Let him take a picture in it.
Yeah, you can borrow Shane for a little while if you'd like. We'll send him out there.
Yeah.
We'll pay the shipping.
He might be late, but
I don't have any.
Come on by.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Shobo.
Well, we hope that we talk to you soon down the line. If if something gets freed up for that Emerald City Con next year, February, March, you let us know. I mean, we're going to be over there in the neighborhood.
Please.
Love to hang
That'd be
out.
great, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Paul, how do they find us in the universe of the internet?
you find us in the universe of the internet at Into the West Comics on TikTok, at Into the West Comics on Instagram, _comics on Twitter. If you go to Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, you can find us on any of your audio platforms of choice. I forgot what I was saying for a second.
okay.
And then at the conclusion of this video, there will be a new comic book day segment that we recorded last week. And then keep an eye out this week. We're going to be recording another new comic book day segment where we are making an effort to talk more about kind of indie stuff, kind of what Shobo was talking about.
Yep.
So check those out. Be sure to do that. And also, I'm going to throw to Shobo to plug anything he has, his Twitters, Instagram,
Please.
Yes, please, Shobo.
websites, whatever's going on there, or even just projects.
Hey, yeah. So if you want to follow me, the best place is probably at Shobo Coca on Twitter. I am on Instagram. I don't use it very much. Same handle. Probably the next big thing that I've got coming out is Shof and I contributed to Metal Hurlant, which is the French iteration of Heavy Metal Magazine. We contributed a story called Hot Ground to it. It should be coming out next month. So if you read French, keep an eye out. It's a really cool little story.
Sweet.
Hope you enjoy it.
That's exciting. All right.
Shane,
That's
what
all
do
I
you
got.
Other than wanting to go see Shobo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
stealing
that's
Shobo's
pretty-
shirt.
that's
He didn't want
pretty-
to see Shobo. He wanted to steal Shobo's
That's pretty
shirt.
that's pretty much all I want to say. I want to thank Shobo again for
Wearing a great shirt.
for wearing a great shirt, number one, and for just demonstrating his passion and his emotion and telling us how he comes up with these great things. I thought it was really fantastic.
Well, the
Why
love
you-
definitely comes across, man. We really do
I know,
appreciate you
this-
taking the
guy's
time.
great.
Yeah, the love comes across, and it comes across
100%.
on the page too. Whether you're collaborating with your brother or with George, I mean, it's great, and he's an incredible artist too.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Buckhead
He
is
does
beautiful, yeah.
Shof does incredible art. So check out that on the Plus, on the Disney Plus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Kazazimoto, you got to check that out.
Absolutely.
We're gonna check that out.
Absolutely.
But again, thank you for hanging out with us, and we appreciate you. We'll talk to you again soon, sir.
Excellent beard.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Bravo to your beard.
That's what Shane looked like 30 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I was actually handsome at some point in my life. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good night. We appreciate you. Or
Yeah.
good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good
Have a good
morning.
morning. To eat breakfast tacos.
I will. Absolutely. Now
We're
I'm
going to go
hungry. I'm
eat
gonna do
dinner
that.
tacos. We can all be eating tacos at the same
At the
time,
same
Yep,
time.
that's right.
but at different times.
Yeah.
Oh, very smooth there, Paul.
Thanks.
Yep, it's taco time.
Sometimes I'm
In
smart.
it's always taco time in America, but it's taco time in the Philippines as well. Make sure you get over there and get some breakfast tacos. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
We appreciate you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you,
All the
Shobo.
guys
See you
who
guys
hung out.
Thank
Yep.
you. Bye.
Even Shane. We
Good night,
appreciate
Eva.
him too.
I love you.
Yes, good night, Eva. We love you.
Good night,
Goodbye.
Eva. We love you. That's
Thank
his
you.
wife, for the record.
I think people figure that out.
yeah, sure.
Good night, Sonny. We love you. Good night,
Bye,
Donovan.
Sonny.
Love
Love
you.
you.
Austin, congratulations.
Austin, congratulations. Love you. Austin, love you.
Say it on there.
I got it in there.
Congrats, Austin, graduating with a master's
Are we
degree
back
today.
again?
Are we back?
love you.
Congratulations, Austin.
Congrats,
You milkshake. You done it again,
Milk-
baby.
You shook that
You-
milk, player.